What's going on, everybody? Franco here with a segment for you. And the point of this video here is to help try to stop the spread of misinformation about the coronavirus. Okay, first, I just want to ask you about where do you think it came from? I want you to think about it to yourself. Where do you think that this came from? And then ask yourself, why do you think this? Did you hear it from somewhere else? Did you hear it from somewhere where you think it's reliable? Did you hear it from your favorite YouTuber? Did you hear it from the mainstream news? And then ask yourself, how do they know? Did they have somebody who claims to be an expert on? Did they have somebody who claims to have tracked down their research and found the source of where it came from? How do you know they know what they're talking about? Did they cite their primary source of where they got that information from? There's a lot of misinformation spreading that way because a lot of people already have some preconceived notions because they hear people who they like repeating something over and over again. And then they hold on, they get attached to that conclusion and they want it to be true so bad. Oh, it came from this lab. It came from this lab in Wuhan, China. How do you know that? So I provided a video here which I will leave in the description so you guys can watch, because Potholer54, I've watched his videos for a while now. Him distilling misinformation about climate change. He is somebody who really understands the scientific literature. He's somebody who really knows how to find legitimate evidence, not somebody who's getting their information from blogs like what Steven Crowder does, or like even some lefty YouTubers do sometimes. He tracks down the primary source. Where did this information originally come from? Was this information repeated several times and then misinterpreted like Chinese telephone? Because if you're getting your information from somebody who heard it from somebody else, who heard it from somebody else, who heard it from somebody else who's not even an expert, how can you trust that source? And a lot of people don't question that. They take the mainstream media they take the mainstream media or their favorite YouTubers' word for it. So a lot of these people that are trying to tell you where this virus came from don't know what they're talking about. So I highly recommend you guys to check Potholer54's video out, so he can show you why it is that people misinterpret where this virus came from and how a lot of these people don't even know what they're talking about. He shows you he shows you how he came down to the primary source and how it's legitimate. And if you don't believe him, then do the research yourself and then try to show him that he's wrong. Comment on his video and tell him that you have tracked down the primary source yourself and here's your information, and then he'll reply and tell you whether you're right or wrong by giving you his information. But here, that's the thing, you need to provide evidence. Don't just repeat something that you've heard over and over again from the mainstream news or your favorite YouTuber. So I'm going to play this last part of the video here so that some people can get a better idea of what's more likely to have happened, because it's not likely that this virus came from a lab, although we want it to be true. A lot of people want it to be true because we think it's more interesting. And a lot of us want to believe that there's a conspiracy, that that there's governments out to get us and they want to turn this into a weapon. This virus is not deadly enough to be a weapon. The pathogenicity is not that high for this virus. It's not a guarantee that you're going to die if you get this virus. It's more likely to have been an accident and that it did not come from a lab. So I'll there, and what this does is that this distracts us from dealing with the real problem of where it most likely came from, which the video will get into. But I highly recommend you watch the whole video, but I'll play this last part of the video and then I'll make some commentary about it.
Claims it got all its information from a leaked dossier compiled by governments, but it won't show it or tell us who wrote it. A secret leaked dossier does sound more reliable than bloggers, YouTubers and tabloid newspapers, but it doesn't contain a single piece of information that couldn't have been found on the internet with a simple Google search. The information about a 96% match, for example, comes from a Nature paper by Chinese researchers, including Shijun Li, published in February. The fact that the authors of the supposed dossier thought COVID-19 as a virus says a lot about their expertise and the extent of their research. And the information about a...
So if you watch the video by Potholer54, he explains how SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. COVID-19 is the name of the disease. There's a difference there. And just because there's a 96% genetic match doesn't mean that it's likely to be it, because we share almost 96% of our DNA with chimpanzees. In order for it to have been the virus, it had the match percentage would have had to been well over 99%.
Chimeric virus built in a laboratory is hardly secret. It comes from this February paper in Nature. The quotes about Shijun Li worrying that the virus might have come from her laboratory were published in April in Scientific American, etc., etc. No need for the Telegraph to invoke a leaked dossier. All this could have been just as easily written by an intern trawling through the internet and copying and pasting publicly available information. But as researcher Peter Darshak says,
let's look at the balance of probability. That's what you have to do.
That's because there's another laboratory in China which is a much more likely source of the infection. Unlike the Wuhan Institute of Virology or the Wuhan CDC, which have just a few researchers handling bat samples using safety equipment and protocols, this secretive laboratory outside Wuhan employs thousands of researchers. It's never been inspected by anyone outside of China, and yet it has a much lower level of biosecurity than both of the other labs. Safety equipment here is completely absent, and there have been numerous cases of researchers coming into contact with bat blood and bat urine. I'm sure you'd agree that this laboratory is a much more likely source of infection. Now that I've got the attention of the lab leak believers, the place I'm talking about isn't actually a laboratory. It's the countryside, and the researchers are actually just Chinese farmers and villagers who venture into the woods and caves around Wuhan, trapping bats for food and digging bat guano for fertilizer.
People live out in rural areas close to bat caves. They're exposed every night when bats fly over them, urinate, defecate, maybe onto their food or into their drink. And people go into bat caves. People go in for various reasons. They're going to dig out the bat guano, the feces, and they use it as a fertilizer, just like we used to do many years ago with bird feces. They go into caves to shelter from the rain. They're farmers. They're subsistence farmers hunting and eating wildlife, so they get exposed that way.
Even tourists visit caves crowded with bats and infested with bat urine and feces. So if the virus made the direct jump from bats to humans, these places where thousands of unprotected people come into contact with bats and don't isolate themselves are a much more likely source of infection. So why don't tabloid newspapers write stories about this? For the same reason I had to call it a laboratory, to get people's attention. Secret labs full of reckless scientists and dangerous experiments releasing deadly viruses make headlines and sell newspapers. Peasant farmers collecting bat shit in caves. Well, you can see why people prefer the lab story. But all that assumes the virus jumped from bats directly to humans in the first place. Although bats are probably the reservoir for the virus, most researchers don't think they passed it directly on to humans. According to DNA analysis, SARS-CoV-2 first evolved around 50 years ago in bats, and then most likely spread to humans through an
again, just to reiterate so that people are not misinformed, SARS-CoV-2, like how Potholer54 said, and like how it's well known among the virology and epidemiology community, is the virus. COVID-19 is not the virus, although some people who don't understand the scientific literature think that. COVID-19 is the disease. SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. COVID-19 is the disease.
Intermediate species. That was how previous viruses have spread, SARS through civets and MERS through camels. A likely pathway for SARS-CoV-2 was through pangolins. It's the world's most trafficked mammal, highly prized in China for food, as well as having its scales used for traditional medicine. As I mentioned earlier, one so far unpublished study found a virus in pangolins that shared 99% of its DNA with SARS-CoV-2. So what has the Wuhan seafood market got to do with all this? Well, very early on it was clear that many patients coming into Wuhan hospitals with pneumonia-like conditions had a connection to the market. A paper in The Lancet, a British medical journal, confirmed this. It's possible it came to the market from outside and spread there simply because it's the kind of place where crowds of people come together, but it's also possible the virus started there. Not by bats, which weren't sold at the market, but through other animals sold there. Epidemiologists and virologists have been warning for years that these wild animal sales, where exotic species are brought together, often alive in closely packed cages, are a breeding ground for new viruses. They've been calling for the Chinese government to shut them down and stamp out the trade. That's where the attention needs to be focused, and that's why the Chinese government needs to be held accountable. It's always easier to blame scientists because that makes for a better story and a more juicy conspiracy. Most people...
And that's the problem. A lot of people already want to believe something. They already want to believe that it's a conspiracy theory, that it's our government that wants to kill us all, or they want to install martial law. Where's your evidence for that? And then they're going to give you like certain pieces of evidence that's ignoring other pieces of evidence, which is provided in this video here. And they just are so attached with this belief. They want it to be true so bad, and they ignore all this other evidence, and that's what's called confirmation bias. Ask yourself, do you have confirmation bias?
Don't understand science, and they don't read any of the published research that comes from these institutes, so it's easy to convince them that these places are secretive and mysterious. It not only sells newspapers, it sells t-shirts. I was going to make this video about...
Right. So, just some last commentary here is that this is a failure in our system, which doesn't teach us how to do research properly. It doesn't teach us how to understand scientific literature, which is something really important. A lot of us need to understand how to do from an early age, because then what that leads to is that this leads to many people believing in assumptions, and people who get jobs in the mainstream news to also not understand how doing research should be done and understanding the scientific literature. And they end up believing assumptions as well, and then they spread these assumptions to people. And what this leads to also is that this can create tensions with, for example, China, by saying, "Oh, you're doing your science bad. Like, look at what your scientists. They don't know what they're doing. They're so irresponsible. You guys are irresponsible." It's misdirecting where our concern should be. As what was explained in this video, this virus is most likely to have come from an exotic animal, like the armadillo looking creature here, which I forget, it's like a pangolin or whatever. And this is where our concerns would be better off focused on. there's a higher likelihood that it came from this market of exotic animals where people eat them in China, or that it came from the seafood market or these agricultural areas. So that's the problem here. Distractions because we're holding on to belief of something that we want to be true. We don't even know if it's true, and we don't even bother looking at other pieces of evidence that would debunk your preconceived notions. So that's all I have for you guys today. Please check that video out by Potholer54. Please do the research yourself as well. Don't just believe me. Don't just believe Potholer54. Do the research yourself. Learn how to actually understand the scientific literature. And please, for the love of God and the universe, whatever it is that you believe in, don't just believe bloggers. Don't just believe, YouTubers who are not experts in understanding the scientific literature. And if you want to support this channel, and if you want to help this channel grow, I cover a lot of politics. I have a lot of guests on, and the goal is to find solutions to make this world work better for you. So please subscribe, like the video, share, comment, and if you're feeling generous, then you can donate PayPal through Patreon. Even $1 would help out. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.